Welcome to this explainer. Every time you type a question into an AI, generate an image, or ask a chatbot to summarize a document, you're actually triggering a massive physical chain reaction. We kind of like to think of the cloud as this invisible, weightless magic, right? But the reality? The cloud is heavy. It's made of concrete, steel, miles of fiber optic cables, and thousands of warehouses just packed with constantly spinning servers. And right now, the scale of that physical infrastructure is expanding at a rate we've literally never seen before. It's a reaction so immense that the biggest technology monopolies on the planet are suddenly being forced to become, of all things, nuclear power utilities. Let's dive in.
Think about this number, 2.9 watt-hours. Honestly, it doesn't sound like a lot, but this one tiny metric is the exact spark igniting a massive global energy supercycle, because that is the estimated electricity cost of just one single ChatGPT prompt. To put that into perspective for you, 2.9 watt-hours is enough juice to power a low-wattage LED light bulb for an entire hour, just to generate one text response. So yeah, on its own, it's a tiny, localized drain on the power grid. But when you start stacking those individual prompts, the implications get absolutely staggering. And it really hits home when you compare that 2.9 watt-hours to a standard Google search, which takes about 0.3 watt-hours. So a generative AI query requires basically 10 times the electricity of a normal web search. 10 times! Now just multiply that out. Think about the hundreds of millions of people who are on web searches every single day. If even a tiny fraction of those regular searches are replaced by AI generation, the power draw becomes astronomical. We aren't just talking about a slight bump in electricity usage here, we're looking at a fundamental shift in how human computing consumes power on a planetary scale.
Now, this structural shift in computing power introduces a really critical obstacle, and it's centered around something called baseload. Simply put, baseload is the minimum continuous electric power that the grid needs, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, never stopping. Traditional cloud storage data centers, they just hum along at a relatively steady, lower power rate. But an AI data center, man, that is a totally different beast. It is packed to the brim with incredibly power-dense GPUs, graphics processing units, that run constantly and run incredibly hot. They never sleep. So they need an uninterrupted, massive flow of electricity just to operate those processors and the intense liquid cooling systems required to keep them from melting down. And here's the catch with wind and solar. They're fantastic sources of energy, but they rely on the weather. The wind stops blowing, the sun goes down. They simply cannot guarantee that constant, unblinking, massive stream of power. Big tech desperately, absolutely needs carbon-free baseload power. To really grasp the sheer scale of the energy required, we've got to look at the training phase for these models. Training a large language model is a grueling process. You have thousands of computing chips running at absolute max capacity for weeks, sometimes even months at a time. Get this. Training a model like GPT-4 is estimated to have eaten up over 50 gigawatt-hours of electricity. That's equivalent to the power draw of 150 high-powered EV chargers running nonstop. But what should really grab your attention is the trajectory. That 50 gigawatt-hour figure is roughly 40 times more electricity than it took to train its predecessor, GPT-3. If we're already seeing a 40x jump from one generation to the next, just try to imagine the power requirements from pending models like GPT-5 or 6. We are looking at pure exponential growth in energy consumption just for single training runs. According to the International Energy Agency, global data centers consumed around 415 terawatt-hours of electricity in 2024. But thanks mostly to this AI arms race, that demand is projected to more than double, hitting 945 terawatt-hours by 2030. To give that number some real-world weight, 945 terawatt-hours is more than the entire annual electricity consumption of a highly industrialized nation like Japan. Actually, it's almost double the consumption of Germany. We're essentially slapping a major global economy's worth of power demand onto the grid in just a few short years. And let's be real, our existing electrical grids were simply not built to handle this kind of concentrated, skyrocketing demand.
Which brings us to part 1, resurrecting 3 Mile Island.
So how on earth do the tech giants solve this? Well, their desperate search for reliable, carbon-free baseload power is leading them straight back to legacy nuclear power plants. Back in 2019, Unit 1 of the infamous 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania was shut down. It was retired early because it just couldn't compete economically with cheap natural gas. And look, this is a site carrying immense historical and psychological baggage, right? It's the location of America's worst commercial nuclear accident. But the desperation for AI power is entirely overriding that historical stigma.
Fast forward to September 2024, and Constellation Energy signs this completely unprecedented 20-year power purchase agreement with Microsoft. Microsoft's AI ambitions are so vast that they are literally bankrolling the resurrection of this facility, aiming to restart it by 2028 as the newly named Crane Clean Energy Center. This one single move is projected to add 835 megawatts of carbon-free energy back to the grid and pump $16 billion into the state's economy.
But dropping these gigawatt-scale data centers into existing communities comes with a very severe threat, and it's called grid cannibalization. Basically, this happens when massive new localized power demands overwhelm and drain the regional grid capacity. For over a century, our power grid has relied on load diversity. That's the idea that millions of small consumers use power at different times, creating a smooth, predictable average across a region. AI training campuses completely shatter that dynamic. They act like these single, synchronized vacuums where the power demand can swing by hundreds of megawatts in mere seconds. For a local town, this means the infrastructure meant to keep their lights on is suddenly under massive strain. Grid cannibalization can lead to localized brownouts during peak hours, and worse, it often results in spiking local utility bills for everyday residents. Why? Because the grid suddenly has to buy expensive emergency power just to compensate for the massive draw of a tech campus down the road.
This leads us perfectly into part 2, the tech monopolies SMR race.
Because honestly, even restarting legacy nuclear plants like 3 Mile Island won't be enough to satisfy future projections. Big tech has a brand new strategy. If the legacy infrastructure isn't there, they're just going to fund the next generation of nuclear technology themselves. Enter the SMR, or Small Modular Reactor. These are advanced, smaller-scale nuclear reactors designed to be built in factories and then shipped and deployed directly on site. And guys, this is revolutionary. Traditional nuclear plants are notorious for taking decades to build, requiring bespoke on-site construction that almost always goes billions of dollars over budget. SMRs aim to turn nuclear reactors into mass-produced products, rolling right off an assembly line. Tech giants are obsessed with them because they offer scalable, localized baseload power that can theoretically be placed right next to a massive data center, completely bypassing the limitations and red tape of the traditional regional transmission grid.
What we're watching right now is outright corporate warfare, where the world's biggest software and retail companies are fundamentally becoming massive energy utilities. So Google recently partnered with Kairos Power to develop a 500-megawatt fleet of advanced nuclear plants by 2035. It's a significant move to secure targeted power for specific data centers. But then you have Amazon, and their strategy operates on a totally different magnitude. Amazon has expanded an agreement with Talon Energy for a colossal 1920-megawatt power purchase agreement. Furthermore, they are backing X Energy with plans to bring more than 5 gigawatts of projects online in the 2030s. The massive difference in megawatt investments really shows you how aggressively these companies are trying to corner the future energy market. They aren't just waiting in line for power anymore, they are stepping in as the foundational anchor customers required to completely de-risk early-stage nuclear development.
Amazon's approach in particular shows this dramatic evolution. They've transformed from being a passive electricity consumer into an active, aggressive market maker. They've recently formed a global consortium aligning nuclear tech companies with heavy manufacturers in places like South Korea to mobilize roughly $50 billion in capital. Just think about the magnitude of that for a second. A single private retail and cloud computing company is mobilizing capital on the scale of a sovereign nation-state. Their goal isn't just to buy a reactor. It's to invent and build out the entire global supply chain for small modular reactors entirely from scratch. They are using their massive balance sheet to single-handedly engineer a new energy market into existence. However, as much as SMRs are the futuristic darling of the tech world right now, we really can't ignore the present physical reality. While SMRs represent the decentralized future, large-scale legacy reactors, like the massive light water reactors currently operating on the grid, still provide crucial, unbeatable economies of scale. The data shows that multi-unit legacy plants can generate power up to 30% cheaper per megawatt hour than single units. So the tech companies realize they desperately need both. They need the raw, massive, immediate bulk electricity generation that only a restarted legacy plant can provide to survive the next 5 years, while simultaneously seeding the ground for SMRs to handle the decentralized expansion of the 2030s. So what you should really take away from all this is that we are witnessing a profound systemic shift. For big tech, computing strategy and energy infrastructure strategy are now the exact same thing. They're moving to secure their own 24/7 baseload power, actively bypassing our terrestrial grid limitations entirely.
And fascinatingly, they are creating this incredible technological feedback loop. They're using their own advanced AI and cloud computing platforms to build digital twins of these new reactors. If you're not familiar, a digital twin is a highly detailed virtual simulation of the physical plant. They use AI to simulate millions of hours of operational testing, accelerating research, safety protocols, and autonomous operations in a fraction of the time it would take human engineers. It's wild. AI is creating the massive demand for nuclear power, and in turn, AI is being used to design those nuclear power plants faster. It's a self-perpetuating engine driving a massive new energy supercycle.
Which leaves us with a critical macro-level realization as we wrap up this explainer. Our digital future, as weightless and invisible as it seems, actually relies on massive, heavy physical infrastructure. And as these trillion-dollar companies take matters into their own hands, securing the land, the water rights, and the atomic power needed to fuel their expansion, the implications for everyday citizens become very, very real. If private tech giants own the generation, the transmission, and the utilization of the energy, the traditional dynamic of a public utility fundamentally shifts, because control over energy is ultimately control over society's foundation. So I want to leave you pondering this exact question. If tech monopolies are single-handedly rebuilding the nuclear industry, who actually controls the future of our power grid?